Hi everyone, I'm Susan Mulvihill. I'm out in the middle of my perennial bed because I'm working on a miserable project. And you know how that saying goes, misery loves company. So you get to join me as I work through it. Now this perennial bed is wide and very long. And if you've been following me for a while, you know that a couple of years ago I completely redid this end of the bed. I had two plants that were being extremely invasive. One is Phlox David, and it's got beautiful flowers, but oh my, does it want to take over the planet. The other was Gooseneck Loosestrife. So I got those plants out of there, at least I thought I did, and I don't mind having a few of the phlox, but not as many as I had. But then this end of the bed has really become a problem. This mat of grasses here actually contains a beautiful peony, and until I trimmed it back yesterday, the plant was like so. And you couldn't weed inside of the plant, and I didn't want to damage any of the eyes of the peony. And so I just did the best I could. But it's really gotten awful, and the grasses have grown through this area of the bed. So I have kind of a big chunk here that I need to get ahead of and make it look a lot nicer. So I've got a big project ahead of me. I thought what I would do is show you how to divide a peony, also how to divide irises, and we'll see if we can get ahead of this mess. Let's talk a little bit about irises first. You know, they are so beautiful. They come in so many different colors, and they're super easy to grow. But what will happen over time is that the roots, which are technically rhizomes, that means it's a fleshy root, they become this tangled mass, and sometimes there will be some old rotten roots that need to be removed and so on. So what I'm going to do once I have all of the grass out of the bed, or at least I hope I'm going to have all the grass out of the bed, then I'm going to go ahead and replant these at a nicer spacing, and I'm also going to trim back some of the leaves. Now you'll notice that this one, and this one, and I do have more that I haven't dug up yet, are Iris pallida. And that has the variegated leaves, which are so pretty, and sort of pale purpley lavender flowers that smell heavenly. So this is a type of iris that I really love growing. And I'm going to keep them separate from the other irises so that I don't accidentally mix them up. Although I suppose there's nothing wrong with that. So that's all I'm doing for now. Each time I dig up an iris, I'm cleaning it up, making sure there's no grass roots within the actual roots, and I'll get them planted once the bed is back in business. Now there's one last thing I wanted to mention about irises, and I figured that I might be so tired by the time I get all the grasses out of the bed that I'm going to forget to tell you about this. But it is so important that you do not plant irises too deeply. Do you see how we have white and green here and brown here? That brown is the only part of the iris that's going to go under the soil surface. So you want to keep that in mind. One of the main reasons that irises don't do well is because they're planted too deeply. So keep that in mind when we get to that point. Now, did you know that fall is the best time to divide perennials? It is ideal because then the plants have the fall and winter months to redevelop a good root system and become established so that they'll perform well for you next year. And when it comes to dividing peonies, fall is the time to do it. It's the only time of year you should ever consider dividing them and moving them to another spot. You'll notice how there are a lot of spent bee balm seed heads here, and you might think it looks kind of messy, but I always leave them in place so that our bird friends can nibble on the seeds during the fall and winter months. The seeds of different kinds of perennials and annuals provide a really important nutrition source for the birds when they are at their most stressed. So I always leave these in place. Now every time I clear an area of some problematic plants, I'm using my Cobra head, which I think is the best weeding tool ever, and I'm just going through the soil trying to bring up any of those nasty runners that these grasses are growing on. I'm trying to get the soil as free of weeds as possible. And I'm sure I'm going to miss something, but I'm really going to keep an eye on this area of the bed over the coming year. Now I have one thing I have to watch out for. You see this little stake here? That means I have a camas lily planted down there. So I want to make sure I don't cut that poor bulb in two. Sorry about all the shadows on everything, but it's early morning and the sun is in a weird spot. So here is another mat of a bunch of iris plants. Oh my, what a mess. And I have to be very careful because this is a very special oriental lily called Lucy. And I have a sister named Lucy, so we've got to take care of that. So I have to be real careful that I don't go over in that spot. The nice thing is that iris rhizomes have fairly short roots, as you saw earlier. And so I don't have to dig real deeply, but just enough to bring up that mat. And as I do this, if I accidentally cut through a rhizome, it's okay because I have so many irises. Let's see if that will take it up. One more try. There we go. So this is just part of that mat of irises, and you can see what a mess this is. This part came separately. So what I'm doing is I'm carefully pulling them apart. And then I want to get all of the soil off these roots because I don't want any weeds in there. And they're sneaky, so I don't want them hitching a ride once they're replanted in the bed. So that looks pretty good. I'll just trim the foliage like I showed you earlier. Here's another one. Oh my gosh, these grasses are horrible. That's what happens when you live out in the country. Okay, so this one, that looks pretty pathetic. You can see this is partly rotted. It's just kind of a little green tip there, but I'm not going to worry about it. Let's see what else we can get off of here. There we go. Here's another one. I'm just going to remove the dead leaves, and actually I'll have to snip this back because you can see that I broke it, but it will still come back. Here's another one. Kind of broke the leaves, but that's okay. Oh, it looks a little sad. There's a good one. Now what I'm going to do, you see how there's rhizome here and this. I'm going to just break it off right there. Actually, now that I look at it, it was separate from those anyway. So this is really nice. Okay. And here's another good one. Okay, so we got quite a lot out of that clump. So I have an amazing iris story to share with you. Many years ago, a gentleman who was a great iris breeder in this area had passed away, and his wife wasn't sure what to do with all the iris rhizomes, so she just kept them in their root cellar. And she contacted our local garden center, and they said, we would love to sell those for you. And so she brought them in, and they looked like they were dead as could be. And I saw them, they were selling them, I think for $1 each, and I thought, no, I'll get a few because some of these colors sound really cool. So I planted these things that look so dead, And we had gotten a new puppy named Mocha, who was quite the rascal. And I planted them on one day, and 3 days later, she ran over to the iris and pulled one up, and it already had roots that were 3 inches long. I could not believe it. Those iris rhizomes probably sat in their root cellar for about 3 years before they were sold at the garden center. So irises are tough, and that means you don't have to baby them. Well, I was just coming outside from having lunch, and I was going to give you an update. And look what came into our yard. It was a Cooper's hawk, and of course it was stalking our quail. But I thought you might enjoy a little interlude to see what kind of wildlife we have around here. Okay, back to the project at hand. You can see I have not done anything with the peony in the foreground. That's where all the weeds are. I decided it would be better to get all of the other weeding done first so that it wasn't sitting out in the dry air. But as you can see, I have done major weeding and thinning. I removed a few plants that were troublesome, and I've got room for more plants. Isn't that every gardener's best wish? So now I need to tackle the peony. Well, through the wonders of modern technology, this is the future me stepping in at this moment in the video, because as I was editing it, I realized that I completely forgot to tell you how I got the peony out of the ground. So I wanted to go over that very quickly, and then we'll get back to the rest of the video. Now, fortunately for you, not so much for me, as I was working on the project yesterday, I realized that there's a lot of grass within this peony, and so I probably better take it out as well. Ugh. But the first thing that I did with the other one is I trimmed back these stems because I really need to see what I'm doing and see the diameter of where the root ball is, so that I can carefully dig. I also have a peony support in here which I'll need to remove. I've got it loosened all the way around, but because this is such a huge root ball, there's no way I can lift that up out of the hole. So now what I'm going to do is to cut across the middle and try to make a smaller chunk to work from. Oh, that is heavy. Okay, now we can get back to the video. Sorry about that little glitch there. But the main thing I wanted to pass along when it comes to dividing perennials, and it doesn't matter if it's peonies, sedums, daylilies, whatever, you want to dig around the perimeter of the plant. And I find, because some of these plants are so big and so heavy, I like to divide them up maybe into halves or thirds. Lift them up out of the ground, use a wheelbarrow or something, and pick out any weeds. Sometimes I find that I get other types of perennials growing up through the middle, so I want to get that out of there. And then you're going to plant them in another area of your garden or share them with friends and neighbors, which is always fun. And you're going to replant them at the same depth they were growing in your garden. So this is one chunk of the peony plant. I decided to divide it into 3 because it is so big and heavy. And so what I need to do now is to attempt to get the grasses out of here. Oh, I can't believe how bad this is. But I'm going to stick with it. And one of the things that I want to warn you about is that the peony roots go more deeply than I anticipated. And so I fear that I cut a few roots, but hoping that they'll be okay. And you can see this is what an eye looks like. See this little sprout here? So that's something that is what you want to be careful with, and it's certainly something you want to save on your plant. So stay tuned. Okay, I got this cleaned up, and boy was it a job. But what I wanted to point out, first of all, these are this year's branches that I trimmed back so that I could work on the peony. And then if you look carefully, I'm trying to get the light right here. Here, whoops, here is what's called an eye. There's another one down here. There's one here. There's one here, 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 and here. All of those eyes are what's going to bloom next year. So I've got lots of flowers to look forward to. Now, the most important thing you need to know about planting or dividing and replanting a peony is that you cannot bury these too deeply, because if you do, the plant will not bloom. And I don't mean just next year, I mean forever. So make sure there's no more than 2 inches of soil above the top of these little eyes. That's super important. Now, one thing I did want to clarify is that this is basically a third of the original root. I'm going to plant the other ones in other spots within our yard. Okay, now I have a hole that's the right diameter, but not the right depth. Needs to be a little deeper. So I'm keeping an eye on those eyes, no pun intended there, because I really want to see where they are, and they're too shallow still. So apparently I need a deeper hole. That looks pretty good. You'll notice that I trimmed down this year's stems a little bit more, but I still left them visible so that I can see where the plant is. Plus, I'm going to put a marker in here. And I'm making sure there's no air pockets around the roots. Plus, I'm going to water it in just to make sure I really have gotten rid of those air pockets. And it'll help the soil settle. Now, what about those irises you saw me separating earlier? Well, I have a clump of them farther over in the bed, so I'm going to do a clump here. And remember what I said earlier, only the brown part goes in the ground. So I don't want to plant them too deeply. I've got these lovely roots in here. So I'll do a bit of a hole, but again, I don't want the rhizome to be too deeply planted where it won't bloom. And it will be a very unhappy iris. This is a wide root. Same thing, only the brown is in the soil. There we go. You know, sometimes they're a weird shape and you just have to work with them a little bit before you decide that they're officially in the ground. I'm going to put this one over here. This one's got really big roots. It's a nice healthy iris. There we go. And I'll water these ones in as well. Boy, that was a job. Thanks so much for keeping me company while I was working on it. Not that you had any choice, but what a relief to have that huge project taken care of. I just need to get the last of the iris planted and then we're all set. Thanks so much for watching today. I'll see you next week.